Well, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining us from today. We're so happy you could join us for today's webinar on location-based advertising. We'll be getting a view today into key trends and predictions around location data. I am Dan Dillon, your moderator for today's panel discussion. I also serve as the Vice President of Marketing for Reveal Mobile. Now, just to set a bit of context for today's discussion, I'd like to share a couple of stats with you. Nearly 90% of marketers currently use location data in campaigns. More than 60% of marketers use location data to drive personalization and a better ad experience. And in 2019 alone, marketers spent $26.5 billion with a B on location-based ads, a figure that's expected to grow by more than 40% over the next few years. So what does all this mean for the future of location data and location-based marketing? And what about the headwinds we're seeing in terms of privacy and data quality? So we're going to hear today from 4 location data industry experts on the topics of privacy, on data quality, on current and emerging use cases, consumer attitudes, and a whole lot more, frankly. Today's webinar promises to be very insightful given the range of perspectives we have among our panelists today. So without further ado, I'd like to go ahead and introduce each one of them to you. First, we have Yory Wurmser. Yory is the principal mobile analyst with eMarketer, the leading research firm for digital marketers. Yory writes research reports that answer 3 core questions for mobile marketers and strategists: how consumers spend their mobile media time, what marketers are doing to reach consumers, and how mobile technology may develop in the near future. Prior to eMarketer, Yory was Director of Marketing and Media Insights at the Direct Marketing Association. He ran the research department at BMA, producing reports for marketers and helping set internal strategy for the organization. And before entering the marketing world, Yory actually worked in management consulting and as a writer for TV documentaries. Welcome, Yory. We are so glad you could join us today.
Glad to be here, Dan.
Asif Khan is founder and president of the Location-Based Marketing Association, or LBMA for short. He's a tech startup, business development, and marketing entrepreneur with more than 15 years of experience. Asif is currently focused on working as a consultant, educator, and speaker to the location-based marketing community around the world, actually. Prior to launching the LBMA, Asif worked with companies as diverse as Limited Brands, IBM, Baxter Pharma, Molson Coors, Best Buy, American Airlines, and many more, frankly. Asif has a weekly podcast, if you haven't listened, called Location Weekly. A new episode actually comes out every Monday at 10 a.m., so definitely give that podcast a listen on location data. Thanks for joining us today, Asif.
Yeah, excited to be here. Thank you.
Next, we have Trevor Hamilton. Trevor is the Vice President of Sales, Measurement, and Targeting at Kochava, an attribution and analytics company based in New York City. Trevor leads revenue strategy for Kochava's full stack of measurement solutions across attribution, analytics, fraud abatement, plus a suite of mobile-first data solutions centered around audiences, identity, consent, onboarding, and activation. During Trevor's 20 years in digital marketing and ad tech, he's worked in programmatic advertising, mobile measurement, attribution, analytics, and digital strategy. And in his current role, Trevor also teaches, mentors, and so I'm told, always leads with a story. So no pressure there, Trevor. Good to have you with us.
Yeah, good to be here as well. Thanks, everybody. Let me tell you about the time. No, I'm just kidding.
I love it. So before we go into stories, let me introduce Andy Schrader. Last but certainly not least, Andy serves as Reveal Mobile's Chief Product Officer. He manages the long-term strategy, customer requirements, and engineering roadmaps for the company's suite of location data products and services. Andy brings 20 years of experience working with ad tech companies that include Microsoft, Atlas Aquantive, Adzerk, Digital Turbine, and many more, frankly. Welcome to you, Andy.
Excellent. Happy to be here.
So before we jump into the discussion, I just want to do a couple of requisite housekeeping items. First and foremost, I want to invite and encourage everyone on today's webinar to ask questions. Ask questions of our panelists, of course, at any time during the session. This is really a unique opportunity for you on the phone today to hear straight from the location data industry's most authoritative sources. So please feel free to ask questions as they occur to you anytime. You can do that using the GoToWebinar control panel in the questions section, and we'll compile your questions and answer those towards the end of the hour. I also wanted to share that a recording and a PDF of this webinar will be made available after the event, and we will email those to you shortly after the webinar wraps up. So with that, let's go ahead and jump in actually with question number one and get our panel started here. So given the recent developments, gentlemen, on the location data privacy front, it makes sense to start the panel session today with a question about privacy. Yory, let's start with you here. How are you seeing the new iOS and Android permissions around location services, and then of course legislation like CCPA impacting location-based advertising?
Yeah, I mean, I think the big impact has been with iOS 13, which gives consumers a lot more control over their location data. From what my conversations in the industry, it seems like it's had a pretty big impact on the amount of people opting into sharing location data. I think the big impact is with sites that have not a really clear use case for location data. I think those are seeing really big drop-offs in opting in. For other applications like navigation or shopping or something like that, I think you're seeing less of a drop-off. In terms of CCPA, I think it's still a little bit early for that, and we're going to have to wait to see, what the impact is over the next few months.
That makes sense. Makes sense. It is early days for CCPA. Trevor, Asif, Andy, any thoughts on the privacy question around impacts?
Yeah, this is Andy. I'll take a jump in here. While everybody's been focused, especially in the most recent months, on preparing for CCPA, one thought that I have and that we've talked about here internally is that longer term, the impact on all this privacy legislation and the articles and the Android and iOS changes, I feel like longer term, it's going to make location-based solutions and analytics a little bit more mainstream, right? More accepted. I think as everybody becomes more aware of how location data is used, my hope is that there's more established norms and ground rules that everybody starts to accept, and it isn't as thought of as a creepy thing that nobody really understands, right? So that's just one thought that I had about this. Perfect. Trevor, Asif?
Yeah, Asif here. So from our side, I think that when we kind of look at it across globally, our member base and so on, I think there's a general notion that just like when GDPR came in, certain companies that were operating in Europe, providing location data platforms, had to exit the market because their systems weren't architected to kind of support along that. And I think you'll see some shakeout with CCPA and other legislation coming in North America as well. But overall, I'm with Andy. I think sort of the mid to longer term view is that what it means is that we end up actually with better data overall. Higher quality data, data that people understand and value. And I think that what it also means, though, is I think a shift in how we approach the use of data, more, sort of moving away from the early days of location that were really focused on personalization and more towards a world of, audiences and segments and cohorts.
That makes a lot of sense. There'll be a further sort of specialization around use cases, and we can talk more about that here shortly. Before we jump into the next question, Trevor, I wanted to give you the opportunity to talk about top of mind privacy topics. Anything from your standpoint?
Yeah, all comments well stated by the panel. And I think we're all on the same page that the proper use of location data and targeting can obviously do good things, right? It makes marketing and advertising more contextual. It offers consumers utility and convenience. It has been a fairly massive land grab over the past 7 years, call it, where a lot of location data has been collected and has been used for the most part for good things. Yes, there's likely been some shady things and some rebrokering going on, among other things. And laws and regulations will eventually need to be put in place that will, agreeing with the panel, increase the overall quality of data. And let's hope that the regulations will be put in place by lawmakers who understand ad tech and understand technology. I do think the developments with CCPA will foster better legislation And given that some of the bigger legislative bodies, including other states out there like Maine and Nevada and Vermont, among others, are all approaching this, means that Congress has to act soon, as there are going to be 50 plus different privacy policies that will be really problematic for businesses. And so in my view, in my opinion, I feel the minority of consumers will end up deleting apps that they feel leverage location data inappropriately, or will take the time to truly understand the new location permission changes offered by Apple and Google. I do think that that people will want to, in essence, overall, want to have the ability to receive the convenience, the value, and the utility that data will provide them. So we'll see what happens.
Terrific. Yep. Any final thoughts on this before we move on to the next question, which actually is related and a little more specific? Any final thoughts on this question?
No, we're good.
Very good. Okay, so continuing here on this sort of privacy thread, I want to get a little more specific and zoom in a little bit on consumer attitudes. And Asif, let's go ahead and start with you on this. And I know, Yory, you have some views into how consumers are metabolizing the various changes here in UI and across the legislative board. How have you seen consumer attitudes towards sharing and location services change over the past year? How have they informed, frankly, this rush towards state level legislation and possibly federal level legislation? And then more importantly, how are you seeing these attitudes continue to evolve now that this is becoming a bit of a mainstream dialogue as we move into 2020? Asif, let's start with you.
Yeah, thanks. So I mean, I'll start. I mean, our organization's been around 10 years now, and if I go all the way back, I'll say that it was less than 20% of consumer population was sharing location or using location data on a week-to-week basis. We're now well over 90% in that time period, and I think that in general, what we see is that consumers are getting smarter. Consumers are becoming more aware of the value of their data. And I think the legislation is trying to catch up to that in a lot of ways. In fact, I think a lot of the legislation, from our perspective anyways, especially something like CCP, I think it's less, sort of coming from the consumers and more coming from, politicians and government, quasi-government agencies that, want to have a soapbox that they can talk about. But the reality is I think consumers are getting smarter, and all the way to the point where, we're starting to see now, some, sort of what we call consumer data vaulting type of platforms where consumers proactively put their location data, demographic data, psychographic data into a system. And when advertisers want to use that data to target them, the consumer gets paid in a microtransaction. So I think you're going to start to see this sort of real value exchange type of marketplace around that data evolve as we move further into the year and into next year.
Yeah, this is Yory, and I basically agree. I mean, I when it comes to consumer attitudes, I think they're pretty strongly ambivalent. So a majority of consumers are willing to trade their data, their location data, if they get something in return, but a significant minority are really cautious around location data and location sharing. I think what you're going to see with greater transparency that comes with CCPA and other regulations and iOS and Android restrictions is you actually can get, I think, more initial hesitance about sharing data as the information about the extent of tracking becomes higher. But in the long term, people, I think, will start to realize the trade-off, with the trade-off becoming more explicit. I think it'll become much more. People will become more comfortable sharing their data. But I think there's going to be a sort of a dip in the amount of sharing and the amount of willingness to share in the near term before a longer term uptake, as people sort of realize the full, both the extent of the tracking, but also the benefits to come with it.
Yeah, and Trevor adding here, I think an interesting barometer in some respects are the work that's been done historically within desktop and mobile web content. More specifically, and without going into detail, Kochava is partnering up with Quantcast on some really interesting initiatives, and based off of the relationship that we share, we understand, as you all may know, the cookie policy prompts on web pages are by and large managed by Quantcast on the back end. And an interesting stat, out of when GDPR came online, users consented to over 900 million of 1 billion GDPR requests. So that's a 90% hit rate there. So I think as far as just to back up Rory's comment, the comment on ambivalence and consumers wanting to still receive and get to the utility features that they're engaged in with the content is going to be really key, and I think that's going to really direct consumer behavior. Another interesting stat, just thinking about the impact from a financial perspective, in October 2019, CNBC reported that the CCPA could cost companies a total of $55 billion in initial compliance costs, with companies of fewer than 20 employees may having to pay around 50 grand just to get set up appropriately, and firms with greater than 500 paying as much as 2 million. That's from infrastructure and setting up the data backend aspects and all the legal fees associated with getting set up properly. We feel that this is likely going to have some form of trickle back down to the consumer at some point. And I'm sure consumers want choice, but there's definitely concern in the industry that lawmakers could be overreacting and overreaching to a degree to the detriment not only of advertisers and businesses, but also the consumer. So just to wrap, hopefully we can all work together to find a balance that suits all parties and doesn't hinder the small businesses with overbearing compliance burdens that de-incentivize growth. So I think that's something to keep in mind.
Yeah, this is Andy. I'd be curious for some of the other panelists' thoughts on this too. But do you feel like the press is leading the attitude on this, or I feel like most of the pieces are opinion pieces, and they seem to trend on the more salacious side of possibilities that can be done rather than reporting on actually how location data is most often used.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm not sure that echoes how the consumers actually feel about it as much as it's more salacious opinion.
It's good news, right? Like, I mean, it draws eyeballs and traffic, right? I mean, the New York Times piece, is probably one of the ones that you're referring to, is that was a piece of reporting that started like back in the summer. I was one of the people interviewed for it, and they were poking and prodding and looking for anything and everything that was salacious that they could talk about. In the end, they come out and talk about how they had to kind of sort of go behind the scenes and get data to expose the industry, and nobody does that within our industry, right? Like it's not like this is a regular practice, like they're trying to make something out of nothing. But anyhow.
Yeah, and Trevor adding here, that's a good comment, Asif. And if you think about it, the article did really go deep into the individualized tracking of people, either that were politicians or potentially famous, or using it under the context of using location data to unwillingly surveil somebody, such as a spouse dispute or something like that. Whereas the value in terms of creating valuable location data and opportunity, and just to, I think, comment on something Asif mentioned a moment ago, is in and around the notion of audiences, and to be able to ensure that you've got 1,000, 5,000, 10,000 IDs, if you will, within any specific audience, that those attributes on the users. For example, recent points of interest from they have visited, where you can potentially combine that with other apps on device known as app graphs. Using those in context and in collaboration does provide solid value for marketers. It provides solid value for users because they're getting contextualized ads, and the ability to convert those users into customers and fuel the economy, I think is significant.
Yeah, this is Yory. I think the press is definitely ahead of customer or consumer opinion on privacy for sure. I do think that they're exposing some of the loopholes that are possible, that not the average location provider would have, but that some bad actors or secure networks might contain. So I think it's not strictly sensationalism, but it's definitely exaggerating consumer concerns and highlighting small problems and possibly making them seem larger than they are.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, and I do feel like, speaking on Reveal's part here, we're definitely part of a lot of the industry committees and trade organizations that are addressing a lot of the loopholes that may be present, and so that may just play a part here when it comes out with legislation and Android and iOS updates and so forth. That as we go into 2020, hopefully just becomes more clear on what can and cannot be done.
Let's go ahead and shift gears a bit. Moving away, we can talk about privacy, I'm sure, on a webinar dedicated to the topic, but let's spend a few minutes also on new and emerging use cases. So actually, we know marketing innovation is happening at every turn, and frankly, in all corners of the globe. Trevor, let's get your thoughts on this. What are some of the more interesting use cases you're seeing today in location data?
Yep, sure. I think one of the major ones is the revitalization of the out-of-home and now digital out-of-home marketplace. Out-of-home media is all of a sudden, the rage is super cool because it's measurable, and that is all solely based on the ability to take the lat-long coordinates of a place-based advertisement and then use that to identify the devices that are around it within a specific radius that are what is known as being ad eligible, right? And there are companies like Kochava and others who are taking a lot of that data, the lat long coordinates that we have for devices within data marketplaces, et cetera, and you can also take a lot of the precision mobile geo data and deliver unparalleled visibility on consumer exposure to out-of-home campaigns, and you can track them back to either app installs and post-install events, web visitation, footfall visitation via POI map data. There's a whole host of ways that you can really extrapolate value out of data, out of advertisements and media that was formerly unmeasurable. So call it advanced measurement. I think that there's a lot happening right now, marrying mobile location data with traditional media that makes a lot of sense for brands.
Asif, I imagine you have some views into this as well, knowing that you travel the world and you're interacting with all kinds of organizations across sectors.
Yeah, maybe I'll point to a specific example. Back in the early fall, in our Mexico City operations, one of our members there, Burger King, had a pretty interesting campaign running. It's called the Traffic Jam Whopper. So obviously Mexico City is one of the busiest cities in the world in terms of traffic volumes. You're always stuck in traffic. And so what they did was and kind of pulling from what Trevor just said, blended several of our member technologies together. So billboards, out-of-home placement along the edge of the highway with ads running to encourage people to download the Burger King app, and then blending that with Waze advertising in car while you're driving. So you're stuck there, and both the billboards on the street and essentially the ads in your car are telling you to download the app. And so you download the app, you order your Whopper combo while you're stuck in traffic, and then they use real-time location to kind of see where your car is in the same way that you see where the Uber driver is, and they actually deliver the Whopper meal to you via motorcycle through traffic. And so to me, like the blending of media that's all sort of stitched together or held together, if you will, through location data is really the opportunity. And that's where we've always been at the LBMA. Like we have members in radio and television and out of home, and sort of the more traditional world of location as well. But I love those kinds of examples, and I think we're going to see a lot more of that as every one of these things becomes sort of made measurable by location, if you will.
That is a dynamite use case that you're referring to there. Thanks for sharing that, Asif.
Yeah.
And then another one, if everybody remembers last year, if I could just add quickly, there was the Burger King's 1 cent Whopper offer, which was really interesting. Basically, if I recall, the opportunity was that the consumer could get a 1 cent Whopper by going to a McDonald's and having the BK app on their phone with location enabled in order to get the offer. So they had to cross, the lat long of a McDonald's store to get the offer pinged to them with location services enabled, and obviously enabled them to buy a discounted sandwich from a core competitor. Really clever. I think it got a lot of buzz.
Yeah, I think the whole idea that sort of geo-conquesting of geofencing competitor locations and then driving experiences around that, I think is super interesting.
Yeah, and I think, pretty closely related to this, just the online to offline attribution for retailers, and combining that data with other data sources such as consumption and basket size to get things like store conversion rate in store, the linger time within a store, get really much more sophisticated analytics around how a store is performing and how advertising driving people to a store performing. I think that very sophisticated retail attribution and online to offline attribution, I think is really a growing use case as well.
Yeah, this is Andy. I would just echo what everybody else said. I feel like the use of location has sort of caught on outside of traditional digital advertising, and so the measurement and as Trevor said, the advanced measurement opportunities there are just, we see them all the time between digital out of home signs, movie studios wanting to measure effectiveness of TV commercials and who they're able to drive to a movie theater to see their movie, that kind of stuff that just wasn't possible before, is all pretty exciting actually to do.
Excellent. Thank you all for those insights. Let me remind everybody on the webinar today that you can ask questions at any time during today's session. Simply use the questions box in the GoToWebinar console. We'll gather those questions throughout the session and then we'll answer them towards the end of the hour. And if there are follow-ups you'd like to have with any one of the gentlemen on today's panel, we'll provide information on how to do that towards the end of the webinar as well. So with that, let's sort of focus on the question of data quality. Central to these use cases succeeding is the data's got to be good, right? So Andy, I'd like to start with you, with your thoughts here. What should marketers and advertisers look for as the hallmarks of high quality location data? And just as importantly, how can they be sure they're getting what they asked for?
Now, that's a great question. And again, we could probably spend a whole webinar on each one of these questions, but just hit some of the topics. When people ask about quality or that topic comes up in relation to location data, the one thing that I feel like is overlooked a little bit is often the POI aspect of that, the place data, right? So a lot of people have access to location events for mobile devices, and they have large reach on DAUs of devices that they collect data on. But that data is only as useful as the locations that you're able to map it to, so to speak, right? So if you're somebody out looking for location data or to use location data, then I think one of the first questions is just what kind of locations are you most interested in? And if it's, as an example, if it's a national chain or a very large, well-established POI set of POIs, I think that's pretty easy to get a provider that has, right? Most location data providers today are able to build audiences based on large national chains. But if you're somebody whose audiences or advertisers are more local in nature, then that may be a little bit of a tougher stretch, and you should definitely dig in there to make sure that the advertisers' locations are covered by the location data provider, right? They can collect data on 100 million devices, but if they don't have the local restaurant group that you're looking to advertise for in their location database, then that could be a struggle from the first step. So POI is definitely interesting and something that I think it's overlooked when location data is asked, because everybody wants to know about the number, the reach, and the accuracy of the GPS events, or whether it's Wi-Fi derived or IP address derived, and all of that definitely matters when it comes to location of event, and how that's mapped to a place is definitely another topic, right? Whether they're using multiple events to measure duration or it's just nearby, or if it's actually seen inside the building. These are definitely things to consider, right? And then the only other thing I'll throw out there as well is the use case is also important. So if you're looking to just build audiences, then you have to ask, well, where are you trying to deliver those audiences? Are they with the location data provider themselves, right? Is it somebody who also delivers media, or is it on your own DSP or some other platform? And then you maybe want to ask about match rates and making sure that the audiences that you would get from a provider will be able to be delivered on a third party. And if it's analytics that you're looking for, what percentage of the location population is going to be covered by your provider, right? Do they cover 100% of all the visitors in a store or at an event? That's likely not, but that's a good question to ask. Is it a statistically significant sample of the population, so that you can build some reports off of that? And attribution is kind of the third piece there. Are you measuring the effectiveness of the campaigns? And if so, are you using this, looking at the same provider that delivered those campaigns or delivered that media to measure that effectiveness? That may not be the best route, and so you probably are looking at some other providers there, and so you'll just want to make sure that the match rate is good and that they're actually able to measure the devices that you delivered ads to. So yeah, I threw out a lot there, but it's a pretty big topic.
Other thoughts on the panel around data quality?
Yep, happy to jump in. Trevor here, offering that data collection is really key, as Andy mentioned there, and really the main thing that you're going to want from data collection for mobile first data is through a first party SDK, right? There's plenty of other methodologies such as Wi-Fi beacon, cell tower. Bidstream is out there as well, i.e. the exchange. There's metadata is used to determine whether to serve the ad on a device through the metadata like device type, OS, lat long, and timestamp. It's appealing to some due to the volumes and the fact that it can be actioned in real time, but it's rife with issues like inaccuracy and inconsistency and a lot of fraud, so we don't recommend it. But first party SDK derived data is where it's at for mobile location, and being able to work with publishers, i.e. app developers, with first-party SDKs that are collecting persistent background, i.e. always-on location data provides a lot of value, because it increases not only your daily active user counts, DAU, but having a high number of average transactions per device per day, right? That it pertains to quality. So if there's a lot of pings, if you will, on a per user basis daily, there's a lot more that you can do with that data as it relates to either solving for business objectives or actual targeting or any number of different types of things. So first party SDK derived data through apps is really the hallmark of quality.
Yeah, I agree with that. And in terms of providers, transparency of where they're getting the data is super important. Just you want to know that they're getting either SDK data or getting vetting and clearly going through the providers of any bitstream data they might have to weed out the bad data. You just want to be able to see that you're getting what you want to get.
Asif, any thoughts here before we shift over to our next topic?
No, nothing specific. I mean, I agree with kind of all the comments that are made there. I mean, it's all about asking the right questions and kind of, depending on whether you're looking at attribution or analytics or how you want to build an audience to target. I mean, you just got to know the sources of that data, the trueness of that data, if you will, we always just encourage people to ask questions, right? Because if you don't know what you don't know, and if you don't ask the right questions, you're not, you can easily get the wool pulled over your eyes. So
that's a great point. And let's actually stick with you here, Asif, for this next question. This is a good one to have you start with. Talking about local search. So Think with Google tells us that 76% of mobile searches for something near me, if you will, result in a same-day in-store visit, 76%. And 26 of those 26 of those result in an in-store purchase in the same day. So clearly a very high correlation. Given those parameters or given those statistics, how should digital marketers be thinking about location intelligence vis-a-vis their local search strategy?
Yeah, great question. I think one of the things that we're seeing this year is not just the need to invest heavily in your SEO strategy and making sure you got your site and your locations, listings, and all those things optimized. Working with a good provider around that, because the challenge in the industry, in that segment of the industry, is that as a business owner or a chain operator or what have you, you've got so many platforms today that you have to make sure that you show up on or are listed on properly. In the old days, you would simply, be found in the yellow pages and that was it, or the white pages and that was it. And now you got to be on Google and Yahoo and Yelp and this one and that one and so on. So you really need somebody to sort of manage that for you, that can kind of propagate your information out, and if your phone number changes or whatever, it all changes in one place. So that's the first piece. I think the other big piece that we're seeing this year is the role that voice is playing in all of this. So it's not just search as we know it, but it's really, statistically, we're seeing 50% of all search next year, depending on whether you look at our data or other people's data, is initiated by voice now. So whether that's through, a connected CarPlay or through an Alexa or Google or home type of device or what have you, more and more now we're simply speaking, what we want to search. And I think brands need to really adapt to that. And optimize for that as well. So I think that's a big piece. And I think the commerce that comes from that, you talk about 26% of these searches result in purchase. Well, the reality is that, just the commerce piece of it alone is $2 billion this year, voice search initiated commerce. And that's projected to be 40 billion by 2022. So it's growing really fast.
This is Yory. I think using analytics to find exactly where your customers are coming from. So when you actually bid within Google, you're bidding in the right area. I think is really key. And a second, pretty straightforward one, but not done nearly well enough, is just having all the store information proper, the phone numbers, the hours, things like that. Really low-hanging fruit that you really need to do, and not everyone does.
Yeah, and just to add on, obviously having optimized location pages are critical. Having in-depth localized content on those pages is solid as well. And when it comes to SEO, making sure that title tags, URL structure, and header tags are all optimized. And I think monitoring and managing consumer reviews is really important as well. And thinking about that, this level of personalization of the user experience is obviously made possible by location data. So conversion results can show consumers that are acting on the suggestions that Google search engine makes. In some respects, it could be said that's the end that justifies the means, and shows how important location data is to any brand strategy, especially those with brick and mortar locations.
All right, very good. Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate that. So we have one last question to cover before we move on to attendees' questions. And let me seize the moment here and take the opportunity to remind everyone on the webinar today that you are welcome to ask questions at any time using your webinar console, the questions box on your webinar console, and we will get to those here in very short order. So Trevor, I'd like to get your perspective on this last topic just to start off. The trend towards ad tech in-housing, we know it's ebbing, it's flowing. There seems to be some sort of variance in to what extent it's happening, but it's definitely leaving a role for agencies to provide strategic consulting and specialized execution. What are some of the opportunities you see in brands bringing location intelligence capabilities in-house? How do you see this whole ad tech in-housing play out?
Yeah, sure. That was directed to me, correct?
Yep, that's right, Trevor.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Yeah, I mean, just to complement that, in ANA has suggested that upwards of 78% of its members had some kind of in-house agency in 2018 versus just 58% in 2013. So obviously there's a push and a strive to leverage data more strategically and in real time to obviously save cost, bring expertise in-house. And some brands are looking to insource different elements of their marketing, including digital advertising, creative or design, and even media buying. Thinking of it as, rather than, pay, just as an example, thinking about a company from a cost implication perspective, hiring an agency to invest, making it up $500 million in programmatic spend, they could instead hire 5 quants who would, rig up a bidder via beeswax and have them leverage data for all the targeting needs that they would have to drive potentially the same business value in return, if not, potentially better. So there's lots of things to think about. And as it relates to bringing location data in-house, I think a lot of brands are learning to use audience insights about their own best users as a means to drive business value. And just sort of thinking through a real-time example, take Marriott, for example, and let's say that they want to do some form of a strategic partnership with an airline. Well, they could identify through users who have the Marriott app on device at key airports for Newark, JFK, LAX, and Miami. Are their users frequenting the United terminal more, or the Delta terminal, or the Southwest terminal? So they could then use that to identify that most people are United travelers, therefore they should be doing a strategic partnership with United. Same could be said for pursuing with AppGraph. If more consumers have of Marriott also have the United app on device versus a competitive airline, that sort of is proof in the pudding. But I think there's a lot of different ways that verticals like banks, financial technology, hedge funds are all using location data very strategically to power their businesses.
Yeah, this is Andy. I'd echo that as well. I feel like brands are more data sophisticated just in general, and so you do see a lot of quants and a lot of data science teams internal to larger brands especially. And so while they manage their own customer insights and customer data, they very much are excited about layering on additional data sources, and location data is just one of those. So while they may have media teams and ad tech brought in-house or not, they definitely have a data side of the house that's hungry for more data. So they're not necessarily interested in the traditional ad tech platforms, right? They're not looking to build audiences and run campaigns, these teams anyways, but they definitely appreciate having access to the raw data that they can marry with their own internal data to drive insights like Trevor's example of similar shopping habits amongst their customers, right? Whether they're a CPG brand that's looking for new sources of partnerships or just insights into how far their customers travel before they shop for their own goods.
Asif, Yory, any questions on the ad tech in-housing topic?
I don't have too much to add from what everyone else said. I just, I would add that a lot of companies are looking at first-party DMPs, which allow them to do everything that Trevor and Andy said. So that's definitely a trend we're seeing as well.
Okay, very good. With that, let's go ahead. Oh, I'm sorry, Asif, did you have one comment there?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, I agree with what the guys have all said too. I think one of the things from our perspective, I think for bigger brands, for sure, bigger organizations, that have that capability in house. I think with a lot of the smaller brands that we deal with too, I think they certainly want the data. They're bringing a lot of this the data in house. The challenge for a lot of them though is they don't have the ability to properly interpret that data, to turn it into something they can actually interpret that data.
See if we're having a little bit of trouble with your audio. You're jumping in and out. Can you hear me okay? I think we lost Asif. Sorry about that. Asif, if you can hear me, this is Dan. Please do go ahead and reconnect to the webinar, and we'll get the end of your
for a lot of those organizations.
comment there. Oh, it sounds like we're having some trouble with your audio, Asif. We didn't catch most of that last portion of your answer.
Oh, okay. All I was saying is I think for a lot of smaller organizations, one of the challenges is having the capability to actually interpret the data that they have, even when they bring it in-house, in order to turn it into something they can act on. So in a lot of ways, they're asking for the data analytics companies to not just provide the data, but to actually, sort of do the services consulting work on top of it, relative to to their business, to tell them what to do with that data.
Asif, I'm so sorry to tell you, we're having a little bit of trouble with your audio. It may be something with your mobile connection. Let me just go ahead and move into the attendee question portion of the webinar. And please do submit questions as they occur to you. You've had some time to hear our panelists get their various perspectives on location data, privacy, quality, use cases, etc. Please do submit those questions via the questions box, and we'll get to those here very shortly. One quick item I wanted to share with everybody before we transition over to questions, though, are upcoming events and research papers coming from our panelist organizations here on today's session. So for the LBMA, you just heard Asif talking. He is the president and founder of LBMA. They are a signature sponsor of the LOCA conference, which focuses on how retail, logistics, and travel professionals are leveraging location-based technologies and services. It's really a cross-industry event that makes LOCA special, gives it a global perspective, and as you can see here, that's in Wiesbaden, Germany, here in a few weeks. Kochava, for their part, has an upcoming Winter Summit. That's a 3-day gathering of marketing and data industry professionals and decision makers taking place in Sandpoint, Idaho this year. Attendees can request an invitation to attend. Folks can request an invitation to attend. It is exclusive and it is by invitation only. So you can get more information and request an invitation to the Winter Summit on Kochava's website at kochava.com. eMarketer, Yory has a upcoming research paper on location intelligence coming out in February. The paper will address the collection of location data and how it's becoming more difficult as governments impose regulations and consumers become more aware of data sharing, how it's becoming more difficult to collect that data, I should say. And the report looks at how marketers are using location data in light of these new considerations. And then lastly, Reveal Mobile has an upcoming webinar. We're going to get a full service digital agency's view into connecting the physical and digital worlds through advertising. They'll be sharing best practices for optimizing ad spend across media, and they'll be sharing tips on how to identify, find, and convert target audiences. And we'll be sure everybody on today's webinar gets an invite to that. So with that, let's jump over to questions, and let me see what we have here in the queue. I'll just go in order. And any one of you gentlemen on the webinar panel is welcome to jump in on any of these. The first question is around beacons. Do you see any progress in the use of beacons for location intelligence in 2020?
Anybody want to take that one?
Asif, I know you've done work with beacons in the past. Do you have a perspective on this question?
Can you guys still hear me right now? I think the audio is going in and out.
Yep, we can hear you just fine now. Go ahead, Asif.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think there's still a place for beacons right now, but I think to a comment I made earlier, I think the use case for them has greatly shifted. I think, the idea of kind of the proximity-based marketing, push messaging, offer coupon, I think that world is quickly disappearing, and kind of the use of beacons more as a way to measure presence, traffic counts, dwell times, those types of things, are kind of where we're at today. The other piece of it, I think, is how you can kind of use the beacon in a lot of ways as sort of a location awareness presence piece, and then connect that up to the transactional layer of technologies in those environments, whether that's CRM system, loyalty platforms, point of sale systems, et cetera, to sort of inform or blend the data that you're getting from the location aspect with, data that, sort of gives you a bigger, a more defined picture of what the audience is that you're trying to build.
Very good. I appreciate that. The next question is around brands optimizing search or ads for voice. What's the difference for a consumer using a voice search versus a keyword search? Steve, do you want to take that one as well, or Trevor?
I'll let Trevor go.
Yeah, I don't have a ton of detail on the statistical differences between keyword and voice. I would say from a potential real-time ability to engage with whether if it's a bot or some form of a service from a brand that they have that's voice enabled, to be able to get intelligently driven results back to you that meet your specific need. I think there could be some interesting upticks as far as the actions that are taken behind the user with a greater propensity for conversion versus the reliance on a keyword search and the user having to comb through various results that are returned and then action that way. It feels like the propensity for voice to have greater impact in conversion rates is upon us.
Makes sense.
Yeah,
okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, I would add just there are a couple of other considerations for marketers, that the responses have to be much more based in natural language and clear than you would have from text-based. And secondly, you're getting one response, so it becomes incredibly important to be that response and to optimize for that. So those would be the two things I'd say.
That's a perfect insight. I'm glad you added that point, Yory. Thank you. The next question is around other authoritative sources. So we mentioned earlier the LBMA podcast, Location Weekly. The question is, are there any other sources you gentlemen would recommend checking out to keep up with changes or trends in location data? And Yory, you're at liberty, of course, to share eMarketer's 800-pound gorilla presence in this space, if you'd like.
Yeah, I mean, of course, we do have that. We do have an annual report on it, but just I think the LBMA's report and things like that, podcast. I think that they're great ways to cover it. I don't have anything more specific than that.
I would say, Trevor, offering that the companies who are the absolute experts within location targeting and location data are the ones to follow and the ones to observe in terms of new announcements and or papers that they're putting out or otherwise. Companies like Digital Element with the IP intelligence side, Gravy Analytics, Place IQ, obviously Foursquare, Cubic. Following a lot of these guys who are the pure play location experts who do things right, I think is an interesting way to pick up additional pieces of insight and information.
Yeah, you completely agree with that. I think a lot of the companies in the space are kind of leading the charge in terms of sort of just pushing the boundaries and pushing the discussion on what can be done with this. Obviously we cover a lot of that in the weekly podcast, but I think also too, like just looking at what Kochava is doing with their event and eMarketer and so on. I think there's a lot of good events out there and a lot of good case studies and speakers and folks out there that you can just follow as well that talk about this stuff on a regular basis. Just find them on social media and start following them. It's just a great way to kind of stay current on what's going on.
This is Andy. I think those are great points, and as you make that list there, Trevor, that's what I was thinking as well. Was where do I go to read and catch up on all this stuff? And it is really us in the industry, right? I mean, we and our competitors are all leading the charge, and a lot of us are working together on a lot of various committees as partners in a lot of different ways, just to inform consumers and make sure that we're all on the same page with what's right and wrong and out of bounds, and even working with the press in a lot of ways, even though I wish that they would represent our story a little bit better.
Let me jump over to the recent group. cookies on Chrome. So the question is, given that announcement, how does this affect location intelligence? What's going to happen to device IDs? Same thing as cookies, i.e. disappearing, or will there be some more, I guess, gentle evolution in terms of mobile ad IDs? Any crystal ball reading here on the panel?
Yeah, I think Trevor offering that there are, certainly discussions about deprecation of the IDFA on Apple's behalf that could potentially hit over the next year, maybe two. I do think that device IDs are obviously central to the whole entire developer community to operate and run their business. So before any sweeping changes are made, it's likely that an additional identifier will surface that the industry will be able to rally around, build tech around, and ensure that they don't miss a beat from a way that they're running their businesses as of today.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Trevor. And the last question we have in the queue for today is, and this is a real crystal ball question, where do you see location-based advertising in 2030? So in other words, this is carte blanche to really answer with whatever whimsical vision casting you'd like to exhibit here. And any insights, gentlemen, into where we'll be in 10 years?
Yeah, I think Sergey Brin was definitely an early adopter and pioneer of the glass concept in terms of having some form of optical read to provide content and insight and information. Wouldn't doubt that that will, be relevant within 10 years, and that'll start to manifest in optical products that people will wear that will be obviously digitally enabled with content and information. So, what a better way to, have a real-time readout of a consumer's, physical presence by then versus having something on that they're wearing on their for every move that they make. So I would think that some form of optical device will be out there that's going to be promoting content and services to consumers.
I'll write that one down.
Yeah. When I look back 10, 15 years ago, I remember having to explain to all my relatives why they were seeing ads for pages that they had left on other websites and things in shopping carts and things like that, and how cookies actually worked on the internet. And so, I mean, it just makes me think that, as much as location data has been coming into its own over the last 4 years or so, that as we look forward 10 years, I think it'll just become commonplace, and everybody will accept that it's useful in a lot of different ways for a lot of things that we're only just beginning to realize here, but it'll just become every day in the next 10 years.
This is Asif. So just sort of echoing or picking up from that last comment, I think for me, if I look forward, it's really about, how location data just permeates into the everyday lives of citizens, not just consumers, like from an advertiser, perspective. But I think, how we weave the same location data that we've been using for marketing and advertising purposes into healthcare, into smart cities, into government applications, into all these other things, like where, you go to renew your driver's license and, there's location data that's playing a role in that, or, optimizing traffic flows, or, when we get to the world of connected cars. And, from an ad perspective, I think, that is really interesting because it means you have self-driving cars, more dwell time, more opportunity to deliver ads in front of people because they're not worried about driving. I think there's a lot of things like that it's really going to play into. But for me, it's about just sort of the data flowing into everyday lives. And, I like to describe it because I'm old, it's like dial tone. It's just there. It's always on. When we used to pick up that phone, you just hear that dial tone. And to me, like, location data is like that. It's just there. It's everywhere. It's always on.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think certainly with services and products that can take advantage of it, people will opt in, and it's just going to pervade their lives. I think there might be a move towards similar to like ride sharing, right? People would be selling their personal data for third-party uses. So, people opting into some services that, they could sell tracking for advertising more generally than just first-party uses. I wouldn't be surprised seeing something like that.
Terrific, gentlemen. I want to thank each one of you for sharing all of your insights, your contributions, and your expertise on today's webinar. Yory, Asif, Andy, Trevor, just a real pleasure having you all today.
Been a lot of fun.
Thanks for having us. Yeah.
Thanks, everybody. I appreciate it.
This concludes today's webinar. I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of their day. Thanks all.